Live. Yeah. So, hello everyone. Good evening. I'm Saujanya here, and I'm hosting this live session. I am a student of Barks, and I'm studying canine behavior and ethology. And I'm hoping to complete my course soon and start start canine behavior consulting. I'm also a friend member at PDT, and I'm looking forward to the Pet Dogs Trainers of Europe Summit, September, I guess. And here I have another member, full member of PDT, and her country representative, Stephanie. And I would want her to do her introduction, and I really want to know her journey of coming here and then how she started her Happy Office Dogs.
Hi everyone. Thanks for that introduction, Soyanya. My name is Steph, and I've been working as a dog trainer between Dublin and London for the past sort of 7 years. I had the great honour of training with Tura Drugas, who is the president of the PDTE, and she's written wonderful books, and a lot of them were quite sort of pioneering about things like canine communication and barking in dogs. And when I was doing her course, one of the things we had to do was complete a final project. And for me, I decided to look at office dogs. So I put together what was going to be just an ebook, a guide to sort of help people create a suitable environment in the workplace for their dogs so that there wouldn't be any problems with behavior or with conflict between people about the dogs. So that's, I suppose, what I'll be talking to you guys about today. But I do also do a lot of one-to-one behaviour work and training with dogs in Dublin at the moment.
I did not know that this was a part of your thesis and project with Turid, and then it became like a full-time, establishment. That's quite interesting, because I did want to know what is the inspiration behind why the office dogs, why particularly the interest behind office dogs, and I guess you mentioned that it was part of your thesis and everything. So yes, so we would be getting into that, but I would want you to talk a little bit about your book first, and then we could go into the details of what our topic is today. Could you just tell us about your book, please?
Well, I have a copy here that I can show you all. Oops, there we are. This is the book. And as I mentioned, what it's supposed to do is give people the information that they need to make having their dogs in the workplace a success. Because when I was working in London, I was meeting lots of people who were bringing their dogs to work and things were going wrong. And initially I was really surprised because it sounds like such a good solution for the dogs and for the people. Because of course the dogs aren't lonely, the people don't have to worry about their dog or pay for doggy daycare. So I was really interested to find out why people were having problems with it. And when I began to sort of get into it and meet all these clients in London who were having issues, and I began to hear the routine that their dogs were having and the setups in the workplace, it became really obvious to me that there were some really simple things, I suppose, that were going wrong. And that if those could be solved, there'll be a much greater chance of it working out. And one puppy that really, I suppose he was the thing that really set me on this path. I had this lovely lady who came along to puppy class with her lovely little Dachshund puppy, and she'd wanted to get a puppy for years, but she knew that she couldn't get a puppy and then leave the puppy at home when she went to work full time. So she'd spoken to all of her colleagues and she'd spoken to her boss, and everyone was really enthusiastic at the thought of having this lovely little Dachshund puppy in the workplace. But of course, the reality of having a dog in the workplace and the idea of having a dog in the workplace can be two quite different things. And by the time this lovely little puppy was 4 months old, he was running around and he was taking things out of people's handbags, and he was barking when people came into the office and he was barking when people left. And then when they tried to put him in a crate to stop the barking, he was barking because he wanted to get out of the crate. So her best laid plans were really falling apart. And it came to a point where really she felt she couldn't bring the dog to work anymore. And she was really upset because, she didn't want to leave him at home. She didn't want to be falling out with her colleagues at work. So that was what really made me think, what can we do to make sure that when dogs are going to the workplace, that it's all going to go smoothly and you're not going to have that sort of situation where dogs are being fired.
Yeah. So now that you did mention this, the journey to office dogs, happy office dogs, I would want you to touch upon one point, I think, which will probably lay the foundation for our talk today, as to what really would you classify as a difference between dog friendly and dog owner friendly. I did see this blog post on your website, so I'm very intrigued to know what would you classify dog friendly versus dog owner friendly.
And that's a really good question. And I think this is where a lot of misunderstandings begin. Because usually, when a place describes itself as dog friendly, what it actually means is that it's dog owner friendly. So it's an environment that's set up for humans where dogs are allowed. And that's quite at odds with what you might expect if you were going to somewhere that was child friendly. When a business says that it's child friendly, it usually means that it's set up to sort of facilitate children and to cope with the needs that children have. But often, if a coffee shop, say, is dog friendly, there's no special area for the dogs to be. There's no dog beds. The dogs aren't allowed on furniture, so they're expected to just come in and then sit under the table and not move and not cause any problems while the human is having their coffee or chatting with their friends. But I really think that dog friendly should mean an awful lot more than that. I think that dog friendly should mean that the dog's needs are thought about as well. So, thinking about things like space, what space can the dog have? Um, are there dog beds provided, or can people bring their dog beds? Is there somewhere for them to put their dog beds if they bring them? Or better still, can the dogs hop up on the furniture? Most of the time, that is where dogs want to be. And I've been to lots of dog friendly coffee shops that did allow the dogs up on the chairs or the sofas. So that's really nice for them. Thinking about things like noises, because of course, dogs' sense of hearing is much better than ours. A lot of their senses are much better than ours. So things like coffee machines, if the dog's bed is really near to a screeching coffee machine, that's probably not going to be very pleasant. Or if there's lots of really loud music, that could be quite offensive to the dog's ears. So, one thing I suggest in that blog post is having a happy hound hour, because sometimes they have happy hour in pubs where you can get cheap drinks. What I'm suggesting is a happy hound hour where they turn off all the music and it's a little bit nicer for the dogs to be there. Allowing the dogs the freedom to move around, because of course a happy dog will be curious, and a curious dog is going to want to investigate their surroundings. So having that expectation and the space for dogs to do that is really important. And then of course, if you're going to have multiple dogs in a space, thinking about how you're going to manage that space and how you're going to make sure that the dogs aren't going to be having any conflict or feeling uncomfortable. And that can be really simple things like having a coat over a chair and then using that chair so that one dog isn't seeing all of the other dogs coming straight in towards it, or that it's not making eye contact with another dog that it doesn't know. So having having these things in place so that the dog actually feels comfortable and welcome and can be a dog in that area, that's a dog friendly area. Having a space where the dog just has to stay still for 8 hours and just not be a nuisance, that's just dog owner friendly.
Correct. Yeah, I know. I think I've seen quite a lot of places where they do say they're dog friendly, but then, as you mentioned, they're mostly dog owner friendly. So there's a lot of loud music, a lot of crowd, and stuff like that. And I think that can get quite overwhelming for our dogs, right? So I think, yeah, these small things, it's quite interesting that we need to make a little bit of changes and accommodate their interests into the workplace, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to go through this presentation and tell us what all these pictures are about, maybe?
Oh yeah, sure. So this first one that you can see up on your screen now, this is a little Jack Russell crossed with a pug who goes to work in the UK. And you can see here that she has a lovely life. She can choose where she wants to be, and where she decided to be was up on the desk. She obviously felt she was quite close to her human there. She felt safe because she was up high. Dogs often want to be up high because they feel a bit safer. So I think that's a really nice picture of somewhere that genuinely is dog friendly, where the dog is allowed to make choices about where they want to be and be there. So that's a really nice photo.
Yeah, this is quite interesting because my dog does come and sit between me and my laptop whenever I'm working. I work from home, so that's not like a workplace, but she does choose to sit between me and my laptop. So I think this is quite a comfortable position for quite a lot of dogs, I'm guessing.
Yes, as close as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we can go to the next picture and see what is. Yeah,
Oh, great. So these are, oh, this is a lovely story. The dog on the left, the lurcher, is actually almost entirely blind, and he was being fostered by this woman who had a dog-friendly office. Um, and this other dog was her boss's dog. And the lurcher had awful separation anxiety, so she didn't want to leave him at home, but she was really worried about how she could get him into the office. She knew he'd be fine once he got there, but she would have had to walk him through town. And because he couldn't see, she was aware that that could be really frightening for him. Um, so I suppose this is more about making the journey to work dog friendly. But what she was able to do was she was able to break the journey up into little stages. So we discussed this, and she was able to practice a little bit, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more. And when she was practicing, they always had two people there so that one person could block, if the dog needed to be blocked from anything coming towards it, or if he needed help up or downstairs, there was someone there to help while he got used to all of this. And they had ways of letting him know, both in the office and when they were going to the office, if he had to turn a corner or if there was something coming up. They used to tap him on the shoulder to let him know that he had to avoid something. And then once he got in, there was obviously two dogs. So another issue with which I think we'll come on to later is when you've got two
correct.
dogs, how you sort of make sure there's no conflict. But they looked after that well, and these guys were friends, and they were really happy there together in the office. There was no hysterics, there was no fighting. They just used to chill out together quite nicely.
Correct. Okay. Next picture maybe, and yeah.
Oh, I love this. This has to be the ultimate in dog friendly offices. This was a company in America called Kurgo, and they're a dog company, so they're very much focused on that. But they used reclaimed driftwood from the big river in their city to make these pods. So this means
Okay.
that if you do have a dog that's a bit nervous, he can be with his owner in this pod. No other dogs or people can approach him. And so he's really safe in there. But again, he can see out, so the dogs can see out and see what's happening. And then some people have their pods open. So obviously that black dog is fine. He can be trusted to be well behaved, and he's okay with other dogs. So he can be out moving around. But
Correct.
and
Okay.
obviously this requires quite a bit of investment for the company. But I think if a company is really committed to being dog friendly, um, this is a brilliant system. And the dogs are with their
Correct.
humans; they're not being expected to be somewhere totally different, which is really nice.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we would probably want to know how can you actually, before anything else, what are the benefits really of having a dog-friendly office, right? Because you do have quite a lot of stakeholders here. You have the dog, you have the person, the employees there, you have the employers there. So what really are the benefits of having a dog-friendly office?
Yeah, well, there's lots of benefits, thankfully, for everyone. Um, for the people who own the dogs and for the employees more generally, it's been shown that having dogs in workplaces reduces stress, and stress is a major cause of employee absenteeism, so people not coming into work. So if you can reduce that stress, you're reducing that absenteeism. They've also been shown to lower blood pressure in stressful situations. So again, if there's a lot going on in work, it can be really beneficial just to have a dog around. They increase social cohesion. And again, I'm sure you found this too. When you have a dog, people are much quicker to approach you and talk to you because it's a point of connection. Dogs are often a really good point of connection for people. Um, and people will recognize you because they'll recognize the dog, and it's very good like that. Um, Also for the employee, if you're the employee that owns the dog, it's also really good because you don't have to worry about your dog being home alone. You don't need to worry about
Correct.
paying out for, really expensive doggy daycare. You don't need to worry about if your dog walker is doing the right thing and coming in. So those are some of the benefits for the employees. For the employers, the people who are running the business, they've got enhanced recruitment. So at the moment, the generation that are beginning to dominate the workforce are millennials, and millennials are more likely to own pets than any other generation. So for an employer to have that unique selling point to appeal to that generation is really great, because millennials are a generation of pet lovers. It's been shown that having dogs in the office increases retention, staff retention. So again, the employer saves money doing more recruiting. It doesn't have that sort of brain drain of losing really experienced staff. It increases recruitment. So when they're trying to recruit people, lots of HR professionals are now being asked about pet-friendly policies. So it's great for them to be able to say, oh yes, you can bring your pet in here. And also, one that tends to surprise people is that having dogs in the workplace does actually boost productivity. People expect that dogs are going to be a distraction, but no, studies have shown that they actually boost productivity. And then the last person in the equation is the dog. What are the benefits for the dog? And I suppose certainly where I am, living in cities, most people go to work every day, and they'll often leave their dog at home on their own in a kitchen, or even in a back garden, or even in a cage, in a crate in their house. So dogs are suffering from a huge amount of isolation. It's probably one of the biggest welfare concerns for dogs in cities, certainly in the Western world. So being able to bring them to work means they're not suffering from that isolation. And I think it's been estimated that in Europe, somewhere between 50 and 80% of dogs will suffer from separation anxiety at some point. So they're not having that problem. They're being with their humans. They're having that sort of social interaction. It's a change of scenery for them, so it can be quite sort of interesting for them. And they might have doggy friends there if there's more than one office dog, or they'll have human friends. So for the dog, that's the big win. They're not being left alone. And as we know from all the studies in India, dogs are a social species. They do an awful lot together. So that's really important for them, for their welfare and meeting their needs.
Correct. Yeah, but I do have a question here, though. I have two very different kind of dogs actually. I have one golden retriever. His name is Sammy, and I have a beagle who is Zoe. And Sammy is sort of not so bothered about people movement around, and he's quite okay. I mean, he stays put and he gets his sleep when people are around and everything. But Zoe, on the other hand, does follow people around if there is movement. So and I have observed that when I used to go for work, they used to sleep the whole period between probably 9 o'clock in the morning till about 5 in the evening. So at this point, what's the best thing to do for the dog also, right? Because Zoe is someone who is so disturbed by the movement around her. So would it not be a great idea, I mean, to let her be at home and then get her to rest throughout the day instead of getting her to office, or if it's a dog friendly office, right? So I'm just wondering at what point you do really need to consider that your dog does need to have your companionship and come with you to the office, even if you have a dog friendly office for that matter, right?
Yeah, and that's a really important question, because like you, one of my dogs, Ferdia, he was an ex-laboratory dog, and he's really nervous of anything new. He would hate to go to the office. He wouldn't be able to go. We'd have to sedate him to get him to an office. So it definitely wouldn't be for him. And there are dogs. It's like the dog-friendly coffee shops. Even if you can bring your dog, should you bring your dog? Because for some dogs, it's just going to be too stressful. And I think you're right. For those dogs, they probably are better at home if they're not distressed, if they're happy, or they've got another dog for companionship. They might well be better at home, just having a dog walker come in or a neighbour drop in to let them out to the toilet. And I think when I mentioned that blind lurcher, that was the thing they had to weigh up. Was for this dog who couldn't see, was going to the office going to be really overwhelming? And initially they thought it would be. They thought, no, it's going to be too stressful for him. But actually for him, being at home alone was more stressful. So you do have to look at your dog and look at your situation and see.
Correct.
I mean, probably neither situation is perfect for dogs. Probably most dogs would prefer it if we could be at home with them, pottering in the garden, going for walks on the beach. But it's trying to find the right balance for the dog in question and what's going to be best for them.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense because I think we do need to consider where they are more comfortable at, what we are able to offer to them, which is more comfortable for them, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
makes sense. So now that
yeah.
we're talking about comfort for the dogs, and how what are the role of the management, right? How do you get them to buy into the idea that you do need, you can make your office dog friendly, and how you could approach the whole management getting into the whole decision making, right? How would you approach that? Because there was a question saying that not all offices are dog friendly, and that everybody is not happy about having dogs here. So maybe this could be a good point to that address there, right?
Sure, okay. So I suppose what what I've noticed, what tends to happen in a lot of places is that this dog friendly idea just kind of develops. Somebody asks if they can bring their dog into work, and the boss says okay, and there's no real policy in place. There hasn't been much work done. And it might be okay if it's just one dog and the dog is really good. But then, if more people begin to want to bring in their dogs, or if someone wants to bring in a dog and there's some problems, that's when you can have problems. So if an office is thinking of becoming dog friendly, one consideration is all those benefits that we talked about a little bit earlier and what the employer can gain. But there's also things that they need to think about. There's also cons, or I suppose things that could be sticking points. So things like a lot of premises for businesses are rented, so it might be in the lease that they're not allowed to have any animals. It probably will be in the lease that they're not allowed to have any animals. So management would want to look at that and see if they could maybe get an exemption to that, or if they want to, when they're renewing their lease, if it's something they could look at. They might also want to think about insurance and litigation. So if the worst thing happens and another employee or a customer is bitten by the dog, who's liable? Who's going to pay for that damage? If the dog pulls up all the carpets and eats all the computers, who's going to be liable? So having some sort of liability insurance and making sure that there's an indemnity agreement to say who's going to be responsible for that is very important for management. Um, and then things like allergies. What if you've got people who are allergic to dogs? Um, and then I suppose in those situations, for people who might be allergic to dogs, or people who might be frightened of dogs, or people who might have sort of cultural sensitivities to dogs, because of course in some cultures dogs are considered unclean and people don't want them that close. Or in other cultures they're seen mainly as guard dogs. So again, people can be quite nervous of them. And again, they don't want them in their office. So one really useful thing for management to think about if they're looking at introducing a dog friendly policy is if it's possible to have dog free zones and dog friendly zones. So places in the building where if you're allergic to dogs, or you're frightened of dogs, or you just don't like dogs, you can be sure that you can go about your daily business and not encounter a dog. Looking at meeting rooms, will some meeting rooms be dog friendly and others not? Looking at canteens, often when places do have a policy in place, it says that the dogs are not allowed in the bathrooms or the canteen, that sort of place. So I think it's really important that the management think about this. And in the book, I've got some examples of the sort of policies that people have put in place to try and make
Correct.
sure they can balance all of these things. And once all of this has been thought through, I think it's very important to have it written down somewhere. So to actually have a policy that people are signing up to. In one business that I went into, they had a dog friendly committee, which was a really good idea. So they had a group of sort of 3 or 4 people who worked there. Some of them brought their dogs in, some of them used to bring their dogs in but didn't anymore. But they were sort of the go between. So if there was any problem, people didn't have to go straight to the manager or straight to HR to make a complaint. There was somebody there to sort of field these queries, to be a middleman, to look at what could be changed or what could be done differently. So those are the sort of things that management need to be thinking about.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's quite interesting actually, because I mean, any community or any, group of people, you do have different places where they stand in terms of whether they like the dog, they're crazy about dogs, or they just don't, or they're even
mhm,
allergic, or they're pretty scared of dogs, right? And how to actually bring all of them together on the same platform and then not cause any discomfort to anybody, right?
yeah,
That's quite in the interest of the company as together, as well as we wouldn't want to come off as irresponsible pet parents, right? So that's another place where, I think it does help that, all of us are in one on one page, and then we do have dog free zones, and that's quite an interesting point that you made there.
Mm.
What about how would you advise people who have dogs and who do want to take their dogs to their office, and which is dog friendly? How do they plan their day for the dog? Because we do know that dogs do require quite a lot of sleep during the day as well, right? Almost about 14 hours of sleep, right? More if the dog is stressed, more if the dog is a puppy, and things like that. So how do we ensure that the dog, the routine is such that they do get all of this done, as well as we don't encounter any behavioral issues with the dog over time, right, in the long term? How would you advise pet parents on this?
Well, that's a really interesting one because, as I mentioned earlier, when I was meeting people with dogs and it wasn't working out, one thing that I noticed, a mistake that a lot of people made, was that they thought that in order for their dog to be well behaved, the dog had to be absolutely exhausted. So they would bring it for a run in the morning, and then at lunchtime, they'd take it out to chase balls or to chase squirrels. And then they were saying, so we've done all this, we've tired the dog out, and he's still barking at people who come into the office. And of course, that's because the dog's system was so full of adrenaline that they were primed to react. All that fast activity was leaving them really adrenalized and really primed to react to anything that alarmed them. So as you say, dogs need a lot of rest, and it's normal for them to get around 40% of their sleep during the day. So what people need to be thinking about is how they can, again, strike a balance between their dog not being bored and that their dog is getting enough rest and enough time to sort of relax, and introducing activities that are going to use the brain and tire them out in a nice calm way, rather than having lots of fast exercise that's might leave them physically tired for a little while, but will leave them full of those stress hormones for quite a long time. And in the book, I have some sort of suggested routines for people, but things like, if you're walking the dog to the office, making sure that walk is sort of nice and slow and that the dog can do lots of sniffing, because we know that sniffing is a really calming activity for dogs, allowing plenty of time for that walk. Because just because you can walk it in 20 minutes on your own, you probably need to leave an hour if you're going to walk your dog, so they can do all that sniffing, and that they're arriving in the office nice and calm and not frustrated. And then again, if you're, giving the dog then a chance to relax once they get in, because they'll probably be quite tired after the walk in, and then greeting everyone, because dogs always want to say hello to everyone. So by the time they've done that, they're probably going to be ready for a nap. And then at lunchtime, again, it might be suitable to bring your dog for a walk, or it might be better to have a toilet break and then some nice, calming, mentally stimulating games. So getting them to search for some treats, or some sort of other nose game that they can do, or having some puzzles, or a snuffle mat that they can sniffle around for treats with. So thinking about that, thinking what your dog needs in terms of physical exercise and what is better provided in terms of that sort of more calm mental stimulation. And looking at, I met some dogs who part of their owner's job involved going off site. So there's one dog whose owners were architects, and they'd sometimes have to go on site visits, and sometimes they could bring the dog with them. So instead of going for a wild run at lunchtime, they'd pop the dog in the car, bring him to the site, and the dog had this wonderful new environment that they could just sniff around and investigate. And that was great exercise. That was really mentally stimulating for the dog. They got to stretch their legs, and they were nice and calm then, ready for another nap when they got back to work.
Correct. Yeah, that makes sense. And the other thing that I think I observed, so the last place that I was working was actually a dog food company. So it was fresh food for dogs. And we did have an office dog there, and he was with us all the time. And in the initial period, he was a puppy actually, I think 3 or 4 months old. And he was constantly biting us, and we were worried what was wrong, because we were doing all things right in terms of not responding, disengaging, everything that in terms of body language, and we were wondering what really is bothering him. right? And that's when we realized that there's so much food for him around, and he's constantly awake. There is so much activity around, and he's not getting the sleep that he needs, and he's not able to rest through the period. And there's so much of activity going around, right? And all we had to do is just sit with him in one room for a while, and then just have a calm 2-3 hours at a time in one room, and he was sleeping properly. And after that, the whole biting issue just went away, and we were just amazed at it, because I think even though we were like completely dog friendly and we had the whole thing for dogs, I think the environment was not very dog friendly at that time, and then we had to do the whole troubleshooting. And I think yeah, I think the planning of the routine and our own routine around the dogs, and how we tend to work, where we sit, for how long we sit at our workstation, I think all that matters quite a bit for the dog as well. If I mean, that's quite interesting as well. And the other thing being, in India, this is what I have observed, that we have a lot of activity in our workplaces, right? Or we do have a lot of talking, and there are some certain companies where you do have a lot of visitors coming in all the time. Do you think that kind of workplaces could be good for dogs, or even if they're not ideal, how to make it a little better for the dogs to have to be around and then be calm around such places?
Yeah. And again, it would come down to the dog. Some dogs would be really triggered by that, all that movement and all that noise. Other dogs might be okay with it. So again, you would have to think about the dog in question and how they'd be. If you do have that sort of environment, you might want to look at things like visual barriers. So if there's a lot of dogs are quite sort of aroused or stimulated by any sort of movement, and they can get quite, I suppose, affected by it. And often people are wondering, because the dog is barking when people come in and they're barking when people go out, and they don't understand what the logic is. But it's just the movement. The dog is reacting to the movement. So sometimes if you can have some sort of visual barrier, so if you have a desk and your dog's bed is beside you, and if you could even have a piece of plywood or something, so the dog isn't seeing everything, they're not constantly seeing all this movement and people coming in and out. Having that visual barrier there can be very helpful. The other thing that I talk about in the book, and that is useful in so many situations, Turid Rugas teaches this hand signal for dogs when they're getting quite sort of aroused or they're barking. And it's just to let the dog know that you're managing the situation and that they can relax. They don't need to worry about it. So getting everyone into the habit in the office of kind of using that hand signal before they start moving, or the owner using it if someone's coming into the office, just reminding the dog that you're managing the situation and that they don't have to be worried about all these people coming in and coming out. I also suggest in the book that it can be useful to put signs on the door just to remind people that there's a dog in there, because in some cultures people are quite loud, they talk a lot and they use a lot of gesticulations, and that can be quite alarming for dogs. So I think if you've got a sign there to remind people that there's a dog there, and asking them to just be mindful of that, and maybe to be a little bit quieter, or a little bit calmer than they usually would, that can
Correct.
help
Yeah.
manage those situations.
Correct, yeah. You also mentioned about having multiple dogs in one office, and how do you think they should be introduced? When they're new to each other, and there's already one dog in the office and another dog is coming in. How do you think they should go about introducing the two dogs? Because I think they would end up spending almost every day with each other in the same office most of the times, right? So
Yeah.
what are your suggestions when there are multiple dogs in the same office?
Yeah. So again, dogs are social creatures. So, it shouldn't be a problem if you put in a little bit of thought and effort to getting it right at the beginning, as you say, and putting in that groundwork. And what I always suggest when two adult dogs are meeting is that they meet on neutral territory. So you don't have one dog sort of suddenly coming into another dog's territory, or that they perceive as being their territory. Coming in a doorway like that can be quite upsetting. So if there's another dog starting in the office, maybe arranging to meet the two of them, or to introduce the two of them off site somewhere, so they can go on a nice sniffy walk together on lead, and then they go back into the office together. And the first time they might just both be in there for 5 or 10 minutes, so no one gets sort of too stressed out, and they've met somewhere neutral, they've come in together. So you've avoided any initial conflict anyway. And then if you do have a dog that's quite excitable around other dogs, or one of the dogs is like that, it can sometimes be useful to introduce them quite gradually. So maybe having the new dog come in for half a day once a week, and then half a day twice a week, and then maybe a full day and a half a day. So they're gradually getting used to being in each other's space. Because with stress or anxiety or any of that sort of thing, it tends to it builds up in the system. So they might be okay for the first half an hour or for the first half of the day, but for the second part of the day, they could be barking at each other because it's all sort of built up. So introducing them quite slowly. And if there is a problem, thinking about in advance how you can manage that. Is there separate rooms? Could somebody move desk and have their dog in another room? Could you again have some sort of visual barrier? Dogs are really reassured by barriers. So that first dog we saw in the picture who had the barrier out of the office, if there was another dog in the other office, just having that barrier there could be enough to stop them arguing or not getting on very well. And so thinking in advance about those practical steps. Or if it was really awful and they really hated each other, could they job share? Could you have one dog come in the morning and the other dog come in the afternoon, or one dog come in Mondays and Tuesdays and the other dog come in Wednesdays and Thursdays? Thinking about all these things in advance and what you'll do if there's a problem just means that you're prepared. But most dogs, if they're introduced properly and they're not really on top of each other, they have their own space, they should be okay.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. So apart from this, what other problems do you foresee for a workplace to, become dog friendly? Or if you are dog friendly already, what are the, issues that, a workplace might, the challenges that they might face in terms of, employees not being okay, as you said, some of them. So what are some of the challenges that they're likely to face, and how to actually tackle them?
Yeah. So I suppose in terms of the dog behaviours, the most common problems that people tend to have in workplaces are, as we mentioned earlier, barking at people coming in and out of the office. So we talked a bit about how you might deal with that. Another common issue that people have with their dogs is that the dog gets very distressed if the owner has to go to a meeting, say, or they have to leave them for some reason. So one thing I suggest in the book is thinking about having a buddy system. So having another person who gets to spend quite a bit of time with the dog and who you sort of train up so they know how to be with your dog, they know what the dog likes. And then if you do need to go somewhere, there's somebody who the dog is quite comfortable with, who they can stay with, or who can bring them out for a walk if you have to go to a meeting. I think that can be really helpful. I've also had people come to me with problems in the office when the dog has growled or snapped at somebody. And again, you can see how that could happen if someone didn't realize there was a dog under the desk and suddenly the dog felt really threatened. And in those situations, what I found really useful is to have some sort of education available to the staff. So in that particular case, I went in and we talked about body language, and we talked about how dogs show that they're uncomfortable, and how some of the things that humans do can be really uncomfortable for dogs, and how, like, what could have gone wrong. And when we did that, people could actually realize what had happened. They could see, okay, the dog thought he was in a safe space, and this person suddenly approached and the dog was frightened. The person didn't see the dog's signs, they didn't see the calming signs, and it was just a misunderstanding. So again, when management are looking at introducing dog policies, thinking about giving all staff that education so that people know how to interact with the dogs, and people know what to do. And I suppose maybe it's not a great comparison, but if there's going to be children somewhere, all of the staff have to do child safeguarding. Everyone has to know how to react around children and how to be and what to do if there's a problem. So I think for dogs, having a similar idea that if there's going to be a dog in the office, everybody has to know about it, and everybody has to know how to tell if a dog is uncomfortable. So I think that can be really useful. But those are the three big problems that people have had: the bark, the separation anxiety if someone leaves, and then something that's perceived as aggression or perceived as the dog being unfriendly. And it's all very manageable with separation.
Yeah, I think that the whole having a educational workshop for the whole staff, I think that that's quite interesting, and that's a great idea. I think something that I'm trying to work with the communities and apartment complexes here. But I think yeah, when you don't have an option but to interact with the dogs very often, I think having the right body language and knowing where the dog is coming from, I think that would offer a lot of education for everybody to how to actually interact and how well your body language should be and things like that. So I think that should help quite a bit, I think. Any other last pointers you would want to give in terms of if someone wants to go to their bosses and make their office dog friendly, or if they want to start taking their dogs to offices, anything that they last pointers that you might have for everybody here?
Sure. Well, I think what I'd always say to people is start with your colleagues. Don't go straight to your boss, because you want to have a united front. So talking to colleagues in advance, finding out how they feel about it. When I was researching the book, one thing I looked into was people's attitude to having dogs in the workplace. And most people were really positive about it. And for people who weren't positive about it, quite small changes made it much more acceptable to them. So things like having dog friendly and dog free zones made a difference to a lot of people. So if you've spoken to your colleagues and you know what their issues are, and you've got a proposal to make to your management that includes everyone's perspectives, you've got a much better chance of success. And thinking about how you're going to deal with any problems that might arise and what behaviors wouldn't be suitable. And then for the dogs, I think if you're going to bring your dog to work, the one thing I would say is do a bit of work with your dog first. So if your dog isn't used to being in a strange environment and just being there, doing some work, going to some dog friendly coffee shops, ones that actually are dog friendly and nice for the dog, but just getting your dog used to being in a new environment and relaxing and trying to figure out what the problems might be for your dog, and how you can manage them. So your dog has a little bit of practice of being relaxing in different places. So then when you bring your dog in, there's less likely to be a problem with them not being able to
Yeah,
settle. So I think
yeah,
that's quite important too. So I think those would be my main
yeah.
tips.
Yeah. And what about people who do want to get in touch with you? Can you let us know how they can, and any more tips that they want to, and also your book, where is it available?
Sure. So you've got the website up there on the screen. I can see it's happyofficedogs.com. It's an easy one to remember. And there's a blog up there with some other pieces that people might find useful, and my contact details if anyone has any questions, or if they want to arrange any sort of talks for in their work, I could do that as well. Virtually if they're in India, obviously. My book is available on Amazon. You can order it on Amazon, and also from the publisher's website, Hubble and Hattie. And there's a link through to that from my website if anyone wants to take a look. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, just at Happy Office Dogs, or hashtag Happy Office Dogs if anyone is looking for me on there. But I'd love to see people's photos, or if people do want to get in touch with any queries they have, I'd be delighted to hear from them.
Yeah, we do have two questions. I think I'm just going to take two questions here. One is about, I'll just read the question for you. I recently came across issue presented by restaurant owner that few of his customers are feeling threatened of dogs in premises. How to create a friendly environment for business like these, where people are around unknown people, right? So you do have customers
Yeah.
here coming in, and these customers don't know each other, and you're making the place dog friendly for the customers, right, to bring in their dogs. So how would you advise such a situation?
Well, I think this is a really good example again of where you could use that dog friendly, dog free zones. So having areas in the coffee shop where the dogs can be, probably better at the back of the coffee shop or the restaurant, so that if you are a person who doesn't like dogs, you don't have to walk through all of the dogs to get to
True.
the dog free area. Um, and I think also just letting people know, because I remember when I was in one workplace in Dublin, they had a staff member who was actually, he was Indian, and he was saying that in where he came from in his culture, dogs were used for guarding. They weren't really kept as pets. So what he was finding really frightening was that he could be sitting at his desk and suddenly he'd hear a dog, he said screaming, but it was barking. And he felt really threatened by that because he didn't even know the dog was there. And suddenly he was hearing this frightening noise. So I think even just letting people know, having a sign at the front of the restaurant saying, we welcome dogs. There might be dogs at the back of our restaurant, or to let people know and give them that information so that they can be prepared. But I do think dog friendly, dog free, split them up, keep everyone happy.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another question. Any kind of workplaces where dog friendly offices is not a good idea. Like certain maybe industries, what kind of industries or what kind of workplaces may not be a great idea to be a dog friendly in the first place at all?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and there's lots of places like that. And I actually my day job, I work in archives and libraries, and when I got into this first, I thought, God, I've picked the one job where dogs will never be welcome. But the funny thing was, I've since met 2 dogs that work in archives, and then again, I suppose there's environments like warehouses or places, like you say, that are quite industrial, where there can be machinery moving, that it mightn't be safe. But again,
Correct.
One of the pictures that we showed earlier was a dog working in a warehouse, but he was kept safe. If his owner wasn't with him and he wasn't on lead, he was in an office behind a barrier. Maybe hospitals aren't a great place for dogs. And actually, this one might be quite contentious, but often it's becoming more popular, certainly in this part of the world, to have like therapy dogs in places like schools and hospitals. I'm always a bit worried about that, because I think it's always putting the needs of the people ahead of the needs of the dog. So I know some schools do have these therapy dogs, so that a teacher will just bring in a dog. But I do think you've got to be quite careful in those situations, and I think you need to put in an awful lot more work and preparation.
Yeah,
but I'd be worried about having dogs in a workplace like that, where they could be, I suppose, descended on by lots of children or lots of people who they didn't necessarily know, because obviously safety has to always come first. But I think a lot of places it can work, even if you initially think, oh, that would never work here, that if you do think about it and you research it and you put in the work, that actually it might work out.
I think, as you said, I think if you're committed to making it work, a little bit of extra effort and a little bit of that extra mile, I think, and people can make that effort and then get their places to be dog friendly and help the dogs actually, right? In terms of, as you mentioned, separation anxiety, dogs do need that companionship of their owners or their parents, right? So I think that makes quite a lot of sense in terms of that. So I think, yes, I think we've come to the end of our talk, and they can reach you at happyofficedogs.com, if I'm not wrong, and on Instagram and Facebook, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
All at
and wouldn't we want to see a lot of office dogs here? I mean, in terms of office-friendly dogs and office-friendly work spaces, would you want to see the pictures? Do you want to ask them to share their pictures or something like that?
I'd love to share the pictures. Yeah, if anyone tags us, I'd be delighted to share them. It's lovely to see dogs in workplaces and to see how it works in different places. And I'd imagine, India is so far away from Ireland, I could imagine some things would be quite different there. So it'll be interesting to see all of the photos.
Yeah. So I hope that there are a lot of people sharing their pictures of their offices which are dog friendly, and then hopefully we'll see a lot of those pictures up on Dogspot as well as on Happy Office Dogs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it was great talking to you, Steph, and thank you everybody who has asked questions, who was here as an audience, and you can always reach out to Steph for any other questions in terms of this whole topic of office friendly dogs, right? Dog friendly offices. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was lovely speaking to you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.